Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. I've been putting a ton of hours into Battlefield RedSec so far, learning the ins and outs of the mode, the do's and the don'ts, and today I want to share with you guys a handful of tips that can help you, in some cases, basically instantly improve your gameplay and your gameplay experience as well. So you can ideally rack up some more kills, get better with your general game sense and game awareness, and ultimately get some more wins as well. So as we dive into everything here today, if you enjoy the video, if you find the information helpful, a like rating is always seriously appreciated. And of course, if you're new to the channel, you want to ensure you are always up to date with everything going on in Battlefield, this is the place to be. So feel free to hit that subscribe button and turn on those post notifications. So the first thing I want to focus on is your minimap awareness and some things you want to look out for on your minimap in specific, focused largely around the red dots. Of course, if an enemy is unsuppressed, they are going to show up on your minimap as a red dot when they are firing. And that's not the only information that you can get from the minimap in regards to where your enemies are. You'll notice at times a red dot will show up and it'll actually look different. Sometimes it's just a solid red dot, and that's going to mean that that enemy is on the same level, same elevation as you are. So if you're just on a flat road and that red dot shows up, they're probably going to be on that same level as you. You're both on the road, it's going to be a solid red dot. However, let's say it's showing up to the right of you and there's a building there. That red dot might actually have a slight up arrow on it, and that's going to indicate that that enemy is firing an unsuppressed weapon slightly above your elevation, so likely indicating that they're on some kind of table, they're on a jump spot of some sort, or maybe they're on a second story or a rooftop, and that'll give you some more information about where the enemy is, so you're not necessarily looking in the wrong spot. You say, okay, there's a red dot to my right. Suddenly you're trying to look there and they're actually above you, and then they have the jump on you. Same thing goes for players being underneath your level of elevation. So if there's some cracks in the road, or you're on the edge of a hill and a red dot showing up, there might be a down arrow, and that's going to indicate that they are below you in elevation. So that's just a little bit of extra information you can get going into an engagement that ideally will help you pinpoint exactly where enemies are. That way you can have the pre-aim up and ready in their general location and ideally get those first shots off and win that gunfight there. So definitely make sure you are paying attention to everything the minimap is telling you there. The next thing I want to focus on is a little bit of attachment breakdown, particularly with the muzzles, and whether or not you want to be using something like a muzzle brake that's going to give you some better recoil, or reduce the recoil buildup over time, or something like a suppressor as well, like the lightened suppressor, the long suppressor, so on and so forth. Some of this is going to come down to how much you value stealth versus how much you value control. Some players, if you're using a high recoil weapon, are always going to opt for one of these compensators or even the converter, which is really good as well. And there's nothing wrong with that if you are okay with showing up on the minimap and potentially having your red dot show, hey, you're on the rooftop, so the enemies might know that if they know to look for that upwards arrow, or you're down in a crevice or something going on, you're off the side of the hill, they're beneath them. So that's going to give you away. At the same time, there's also a lot of ways to be given away in this game. Enemies can call in UAVs, they can be recon spotting, so on and so forth. So there's a good chance that players may have the position on you as is, which does sort of lessen the blow of showing up on the radar because you're using an unsuppressed weapon. But these can be very advantageous for weapons that do have heavy recoil. So that's certainly something to look for. But you also have options with the suppressors. And these, of course, are going to fully hide you with that in-world spotting. They're also going to reduce the sound of your gun as well. They are suppressors, so enemies that are within certain distances won't hear those bullets as easily, or your shots as easily, which can be pretty important as well. And for what it's worth, there actually are suppressors that help out with recoil control. The lightened suppressor is the best example of this, going to reduce recoil buildup and improve recoil recovery. It does hurt your hip fire accuracy, so that's not necessarily always something you'd want to use on a close range weapon. That'd be more so the CQB suppressor, which fully hides you and doesn't hurt your hip fire. But then you also have something like the long suppressor, which is also going to help out with recoil buildup and recoil recovery, but this does add a little bit more hip fire inaccuracy and a little bit of weapon sway. So you might not want to be using that on something like a DMR or a sniper. That's where the lightened suppressor would come into play. And of course, the standard suppressor simply keeps you off the radar, simply suppresses you, doesn't help out with recoil or anything like that. So there are some attachments here, particularly the lightened suppressor and the long suppressor, weapon pending, that could give you a little bit of best of both worlds. Obviously, these aren't doing as much for your recoil as a full-on compensated break would or a linear comp would, but they are going to give you some, and so that's something to take note of. Largely though, it's going to come down to, are you comfortable with whatever weapon you're using? If the answer is yes, you can probably get away with a suppressor, or if you really value that stealth aspect, or is the weapon really difficult to control but you want to use it because it packs a punch? Okay, that's where a compensator would come into play. Another thing that you might not know here in RedSec is that your gun is actually going to behave differently depending on which input you're using here. So I mainly play on mouse and keyboard here in Battlefield, and you'll see I'm going to go ahead and shoot into this wall here, and I'm not going to really control this recoil. I'm just going to shoot the KTS for a little bit, and we'll see what the pattern is like. I'm not pulling down. I'm not doing anything. This is a largely low recoil weapon as well, as you can see. I mean, it's pretty accurate. It's going to go straight up there and then basically just spread around almost like in a flower pattern. But now if I were to go through and I switch over to my controller here and I do the same thing again, I'm not controlling the recoil at all, you're going to see the recoil pattern is actually slightly different. And the KTS, like I said, super low recoil weapon to begin with, so it's not going to be a drastic difference here, but there is slightly more of a pattern on mouse and keyboard versus on controller, where the recoil is actually a little bit less. You can see again, we'll test with the NVO here, mouse and keyboard not really controlling. You'll see it's kind of going up and bouncing around pretty sporadically there. If I switch over to controller here and I do it this way, it's going to be a little bit different, a little bit less there. So depending on what input you're using, yes, there is a difference in the actual recoil patterns themselves. Another thing you really want to emphasize in your gameplay, especially if you're playing with a full team, this would also apply to duos and then eventually, you know, trios as well as solos would be a little bit different, but these roles all play a very, very valuable role in gameplay. All of your classes, whether it's assault giving you the faster plating, that's going to be the most advantageous out of that. Engineer with all the anti-tank and vehicle benefits here, being able to repair your vehicles, take on enemy vehicles there, insanely important. Support with the smoke grenades, being able to revive a little bit faster by dragging or just manually reviving your squad mates there. Recon for the auto spotting. I mean, all four of these offer something insanely valuable, and you really want to focus on using those things to help out your team. There's really a team heavy, a team oriented gameplay loop here in RedSec, and if you split up these roles correctly in your squad, you can have some insanely strong setups when you have, you know, 2 supports and the smoke grenades to help rotate, or multiple engineers so you can take on enemy vehicles very easily while also keeping yours intact. There's some really strong combinations here, and this is something you definitely want to discuss with your squad as you're going into gameplay. Another thing you might not really think about all that much in gameplay, but if you can force it into your play style, it can actually be really useful in engagements, and that is doing the finishing move or the execution. Essentially with this, when you go through and you knock an enemy, they're going to go into that downed state, unless it's a squad wipe, of course. And when they're in that down state, if you were to go up to them and you melee while looking at them, it's going to let you do a finishing move or an execution move there. And when you do that, it's actually going to highlight their lasting teammates, their living teammates for you, so you can actually see where they're at. Now, this is obviously not something you're going to want to do in the middle of a hectic gunfight, because you're going to be hard stuck in that animation. But if you're able to get that enemy in a spot where maybe you have some cover and they're knocked, you can quickly do that and then get that information on your enemy team there and have that little step up on them, which can be pretty useful in those case-by-case scenarios. Another thing that's super important is those streaks, the airstrike, the artillery. These are so strong for a multitude of reasons. Late game, you can use this to basically stick enemies into a really uncomfortable position. You can get them hard stuck on a rotation by cutting off their rotation by placing down a streak. You can, obviously drop it directly on them and they're going to have a hard time escaping it. If an enemy's in a vehicle, using the airstrikes is super impactful at getting rid of that tank or whatever the case is. If you know somebody is camping up in a building, they've got a choke point, you can drop an artillery, drop an airstrike on there, destroy that building, potentially take them out in the process, if not completely expose their position and get that drop on them there. So streaks are always something you should try and carry around whenever you have the chance to do so. Next tip here, another tip I can give you guys is be very conscious of where you're standing up against cover when trying to take on enemies. This can be applicable if you were on a ledge. Let's assume this is a little bit higher here. If you're on a ledge looking down and there's enemies beneath you, sometimes you'll be able to get the drop on them and have that elevation advantage. Other times though, you might actually be hurting your gunfights, because in this game, unlike other games like Call of Duty where the bullets almost seemingly shoot out of the top of your head, in this game, bullets are shooting out of the front of your gun. So if there's an object in front of you, like for instance, if I were to sit behind this chair that I almost knocked over there, even if I have my reticle up here a little bit above the chair, you can see I'm aiming more towards the fire alarm there. There's a chance that when I shoot, even though my reticle is above this chair, I'm still hitting the chair, and not every bullet's gonna end up going beyond that. So there are situations where you could actually just be shooting a wall, you could be shooting a ledge instead of actually where you're intending to get your bullets to go. Even when you're ADSing as well, the situation can happen. There's some weird situations where you might be behind cover. Even if you're leaning there, things can get a little bit awkward, and some spread will factor into that, but it's also something that can end up blocking shots in some cases. And then lastly here, just be mindful of those mission prompts. A lot of the times those missions will come up, and if you're in a hectic situation, you might not always see the new missions available thing. So So always be actively checking, because those are great and pretty straightforward and easy ways to go and get that custom loadout drop, to get that vehicle key so you can get a tank for late game or whatever the case is. Maybe get some streaks guaranteed there. The missions are pretty straightforward, but they do offer some pretty important things when it comes to just strong elements of gameplay, really. So definitely pay attention and consistently be checking that mission prompt to see if you've got new things to go out and actually activate if you're interested in doing them at that time. But that said, those are a handful of tips that I've sort of gathered while playing here that absolutely you start to force into your gameplay, and you'll notice significant improvements in your awareness in game, what you're looking for, how you're approaching gunfights, and how you're able to actually compete in gunfights with enemies here. All this can actually make a pretty big impact on your experience overall. That said, if you guys enjoyed the video, you found it helpful, do me a favor and drop a like, and if you're new here, hit that subscribe button on your way out. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.